Welcome to the Nails and Hammers podcast. I'm your host, Kushal Shah. This podcast teaches new perspectives by walking through the journeys and decision making processes of different individuals. Our guest for today is Kuntal Joyshar, who is the first vegan to summit Mount Everest. We talk about Kuntal's education, his vegan lifestyle, his love for mountaineering, and his calling to reach the top of the world. It's time to listen and learn. Hi Kuntal, welcome to the Nails and Hammers podcast.
Thank you for inviting. Happy to be here.
So before we begin, I wanted to know more about what are you doing these days and how did you keep yourself busy during the pandemic?
Well, most of my time goes in nutrition coaching people. So I am a nutrition coach. So I work with a whole bunch of people who are on their nutrition journeys or on some kind of a transformation journey. Some of them want to lose weight. Some of them want to build superior performance in whatever kind of athletic goals or something that they are pursuing. So it's just kind of helping them get back on track. And then apart from that, of course, I have my personal aspirations of climbing mountains
Mhm.
and of even bodybuilding. So right now, since last 1.5 years or so, I think a lot of my focus has been just working on my fitness and working on my own journey, working on my own personal transformation, and just kind of learning a lot more about this world that I have always been fascinated by, but really haven't ever had a chance to deep dive in and kind of know it at the level I know engineering world from. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, professionally or academically, I come from a software engineering background, and so significant amount of my career I've spent doing that. And yes, maybe decade or a little more than decade ago, I fell in love with mountains, and then I went on a journey to climb mountains, went on a journey to climb Everest, and did all of those things. And so now I am kind of upskilling in the sense going in and getting myself certifications and also kind of reevaluating whether software really,
Yeah.
am I passionate about software anymore? Should I be spending time in this field? So a lot of those things have I have kind of gone through that journey in the pandemic, but yeah, that's where I am right now.
Yep. Makes sense. You're basically treating yourself as a guinea pig to see what works and what does not, in a sense.
I think it has to be always that way. I truly believe in n equal to 1 experiment. And while when I was in engineering world, or coming from a master's in computer science, and you're reading all these papers and you're reading all the scientific literature and all of this, that is great. I'm not denying that there's some scientific literature that kind of points towards a certain evidence towards a certain thing, but at the end of the day, you have to apply those principles on yourself.
Yep.
In this, now I'm like, taking, I'm saying computer science aside, I'm saying nutrition and fitness world. So same thing happens in the nutrition and fitness world, at least in the science and the evidence based side, where people will have a theory, they'll test that theory, and there'll be papers on that theory, and they'll say, okay, this is our recommendation and this is our guideline, or this is where the evidence points. And yeah, sure, so you are kind of going to look at that and say, yeah, but I'm the n equal to 1 experiment. Yeah, first I need to apply that evidence on me. I have to kind of walk through this.
Mhm.
And I that's what I've been doing, I think, probably for a significant amount of time. Maybe computer science, maybe climbing mountains, now maybe nutrition coaching or fitness coaching or any of those things. I think we are all n equal to 1 experiments in our own worlds, I think.
I think that's very fair. And I could also relate to your point about being in software and hey, whether this is really passionate or not, because life has been very automatic so far. When you do your masters, like bachelor's, masters, then job. All right. So now let's start go back to the very beginning and talk a bit about your journey. So can you share a bit about where did you grow up and what all did you study?
Right. So I grew up in Mumbai and I did my bachelor's in computer engineering, did my master's in computer science from University of Southern California. And right out of the school, I got a job. So worked for about 4 years in the US. And at that point, kind of, I was at a crossroads in my life because I always had gone with the mindset that I'll come back. But then most of us go there and most of us never come back. And so that was always, at the back of my mind. But I would not call my situation unique in that sense. But I had a dad who was diagnosed with a disease called dementia. And he was kind of at at last stages of his independence. And in some sense, my mother was becoming his primary caregiver. And I think there was just a lot of stress and on her. And I kind of, just thought, I think this is a great time. It's now, like I've always wanted to go back. So maybe it's time to go back. And out of the blue, just around that time, the company that I used to work for in Los Angeles, they did an acquisition in Mumbai, out of all places in the world. They ended up like an education company, an e-learning company, and that too in the ethics space, and doing an acquisition in Mumbai. That was like, I'm like, wow, that's like, I don't believe in signs or any of that stuff. But in some sense, I thought, hey, this seems like a really reasonable option. And I spoke to my boss. They said, we don't have a software team there. It's like more of a production team. But I think it makes a lot of sense. We
Yeah.
are doing all this outsourcing work through Mindtree.
Okay.
And Mindtree is, of course, a Bangalore-based, big, software giant. So we we said, look, it's time to, like gut the relationship with Mindtree, and probably you go back and start a software engineering team there. And I thought from a career perspective also, it seemed like a very reasonable kind of move, because suddenly going from a senior software engineer to kind of becoming a technology manager
Mm-hmm.
and being able to create my own team, being able to
Right.
create my own vision and all that freedom, I thought that was like really amazing. And given that it was kind of tying into my goals of anyway going back and taking care of my father, so it kind of all happened together. And I was back in Mumbai. And even once you are here with a lot of US mindset, with that
Mhm.
culture where you're always inculcated these values of ownership. And I thought, you just think differently. At least for me, when I did that transition from bachelor's in India to that master's in US and then
Mhm.
working in US, I think that was like a game changer for me in terms of as a person.
Yeah.
And when I came back, I found, that all those skills were very helpful in kind of, not say furthering my career. I
Mhm.
never think of, furthering my career. I'm like, let's just do kick-ass work that kind of,
Mhm.
furthering your career just becomes incidental to, your kick-ass work in some sense. So that's eventually what happened, and life was pretty good. Like I got married and everything was great. Like I didn't have any complaints, no quarter life crisis or no crisis as such of anything. Yeah. So this is how life went on for a bit until, of course, life changed.
Yep.
Always happens with everyone.
Perfect. We'll talk about how life changed later on. I mean, so like I could very much relate to your point about I mean, being in India. I mean, when most of us don't come back, but for those who do, the at least the perception is that we might stay in Bangalore or Hyderabad or one of those big tech cities. But being at a hometown, that's like quite special, and then getting a good opportunity. Yep. Also, now rewinding back a bit, while you were in the US, you decided to I mean, change your diet to a vegan diet. So,
Right.
can you walk us through your journey about like what did you what made took you to make that decision?
I have all like I was born and brought up in a vegetarian mindset, in a vegetarian family. Growing up in a Gujarati family, most Gujaratis, at least in Mumbai, would typically be. So growing up, I was always surrounded by vegetarians. Heck, I still know that where I live in Ghatkopar East, you can't even buy eggs here. But I did ask a question that why are we vegetarians? And the answers were something along the lines, that cow that you see on the road, it has that, bachda, or that, that calf. And they are a family like us. Like they look like us, they feel pain, they feel stress, they love, they are sentient character,
Mhm.
sentient and emotional beings, and with individual characters in some sense. Until I became vegan, that's not how I thought about it. But if you're seeing that your peers do that or your elders do that, that's how kind of you are going to be, that's what you are going to learn from initially, at least until you are kind of exposed to a much bigger spread of
Mhm.
people. And so I came to the US and was leading an independent life with roommates who were also vegetarians, and they were, in some sense, a lot more ethics driven vegetarians than I was. And I remember walking into a grocery store one of the days with my roommates, and buying ice cream and buying Snickers. And my like roommate was, he didn't say anything at that point, but we went home and he's like, you are a vegetarian but then you are eating Snickers. And I'm like, but what's the problem with Snickers? And he's like, he reads the ingredient, egg
Yeah.
whites. And I'm like, what's the problem with egg whites? I can't see them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would eat the pieces of cake. Or when I was working in USC initially at the cafeteria,
Yeah.
for the first 7-10 days I was eating like cheese and like whatever I was getting there.
Yeah.
I thought it was vegetarian, but it
Yeah.
was not vegetarian, a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like initial questioning from my roommate. And then I would buy a woolen sweater and a woolen jacket and or a leather jacket. And then he's like, but leather is not vegetarian. And I'm like, oh. So once I asked him like, what's going on? And so he started like kind of pointing me to a lot of videos around cruelty in the leather industry, the egg industry. Eventually, once you start seeing the videos and you start doing your research, you will also connect the dots with milk.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I did all this research and kind of quickly realized that there's really no difference between a piece of meat
Mm-hmm.
or a glass of milk or a block of cheese or that egg Snickers that I was eating or that woolen sweater I was wearing or the leather belt I was wearing. At the end of the day, all of them came from abused, exploited, or slaughtered animals.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really no difference between any of that. And the moment I connected the dots, it was like, now how do I reconcile between my thoughts, which kind of are, yeah, I'm a compassionate person towards animals and I really like, as a vegetarian I'm taking care of that, from that mindset to how do I actually make my actions kind of agree with my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to resolve that dilemma, I had to reconcile that.
Mm-hmm.
And I started doing my research and I quickly realized that there's definitely two things that are 100% in my control as a privileged human. Whatever I'm putting in my mouth and whatever I'm putting on top of my body,
Mm-hmm.
those two things are 100% under my control.
Mm-hmm.
There's no excuse if I am going in other direction and coming up with excuses that no, I can't, if I stop drinking milk,
Makes sense.
there's no excuses. And I think this was around the time frame of December of 2002.
Okay.
And it was a no-brainer. And the way I'm built, I can't do things gradually. I was vegan, non-vegan at this moment, and I was vegan at the next moment.
Makes sense.
I kind of looked at everything inside my home, which was non-vegan,
Mm-hmm.
including my cosmetics, my toothpaste, my whatever, XYZ, the woolen sweater, the food, and everything I had. I just, kind of took it and went and kind of just gave it away stuff to whoever wanted, or just donated away stuff to a community center, and whatever was left I just trashed it. So I like did a mental reset and I was like, I am a vegan now.
Mm-hmm.
And believe me, I think it has to be one of the best decisions I've ever taken in my life. And I think the only regret I have is that why didn't I go vegan sooner? Like
Mm-hmm.
until that point in my life, there was no game-changing event that had happened other than me coming to the US and just getting more
Yeah.
exposed to a wide range of people and ideas and everything. I think that helped me go on an introspective journey, which helped me fix a lot of other problems that I had.
I mean, in a sense, like you're having a sort of an inner conflict. Like you were exposed to a compassionate lifestyle growing up, but you also knew that you're doing things, consuming things that are not compassionate, which is like contradictory. But I mean, still, when you have grown up in a certain way, changing overnight is difficult. You might have had some cravings or stuff. Did you have something like that?
Uh, I am not built that way. I am built in a slightly different way. As I said, either I will be on the apathy side of things, or I will be on the extreme end of other side of apathy. And so for me, there's really no middle ground.
Mhm.
The moment I decided I want to go vegan, yeah, I am vegan. Done. It's for me, it doesn't take tremendous amount of effort
Makes sense.
to kind of, go through that journey or to like curb my cravings or anything. Yeah, as far as I remember, I don't think like I went through this phase of cravings or anything. Probably, yes, there was an adjustment period because
Mhm.
suddenly now there are these things that you could easily access or easily buy and easily include in your life. You don't have access to them. So it
True.
was not like that I'm missing this, but it's just like, what's the alternative to this? What can I do? Other things. And I think for the first few months, it was just like, you know what? I don't need alternatives.
Yeah.
I'm just going to, uh, it was a lifestyle change around my, let's say a body wash or like a shampoo or a toothpaste or the food I was eating. Food was super easy. Just, cut, like ghee, butter, and milk and all those things out. You're sorted. I think milk was something I did replace with soy milk right away because I like really liked milk. So it was soy milk was still back then available very easily in the
Yeah.
US,
It still
especially in
is.
Los Angeles. So it was super easy. But I think with other things, it was like, I don't need an alternative. I can just continue on.
I mean, the hard part would have been when you had come to India. I mean, your parents would have been crazy that, hey, what you're not eating things. Milk gives calcium and things like that. So how did you deal with?
In some sense, from my mother's side, I was like one of the first guys to go to the US. So when I was back in India for the first time after 2.5, 3 years,
Mhm.
everyone wanted me to go to their places and eat dinner or
Yeah.
eat lunch or something. And then I would go and tell, but I don't eat ghee, I don't eat butter. And they always knew me as someone who was a crazy foodie.
Yeah.
Like I was like 105, 110 kilos, and everyone remembers me as this guy would just, eat humongous portion sizes of, like all this, unhealthy food.
Mhm.
So suddenly now I'm going out all these places and I'm like, no, I will not eat pav bhaji with butter and I will not eat do this. I will not do this. And I think most of the times what happened is that they would say, but yeah, we have not put butter in this.
Yeah.
It's made with oil. And they would, just kind of feed me the butter pav bhaji. And everyone was trying to change me instead.
Yeah.
And I think what happened over a period of time is that they saw that I was respecting their choices by not telling them to go vegan, but they were the ones conversely always doing this. So over a period of time, I saw a drastic shift in them. I
Mhm.
remember when the second or third time I came back to India before finally moving, they would upfront call me and say, Kundal, what does vegan mean? What can we make for you?
Nice.
How can we make this dish? What can we put in? What can we exclude? What do we do for you? I think over a period of time, they all kind of started, kind of respecting my choice. That was probably one of the biggest challenges that I faced in terms of like when coming back to India. It was never in terms of nutrition.
Mhm. Fair enough. I think it's also a journey of making peace with your previous self. That okay, I mean, at that time you used to eat a lot of these food, but now I mean you have made peace that okay, now you are a different person now. So I mean, I think that's also that kind of a journey. So I mean, now let's move to the next phase of your life, which is I mean mountaineering in a sense. So in one of your talks, you mentioned that you climbed a peak in Shimla called Hatu Peak, and then you fell in love with like you wanted to hike more, and then you one day, I mean, you on another hike you saw Mount Everest. So I mean, how did this journey shift from just hiking for fun to an aspiration to climb Mount Everest?
I think it's again probably to do with just how I am. And when I saw Everest that evening, there was a sunset happening on Everest. And like I distinctly remember like the last rays of sunset were falling directly on Everest. Like every other mountain was in the color of gray and blue, and like all dark. Everything you could see those like, but that Everest in middle, burning golden in color. And to me, I think when I saw Everest that way, in some sense, fallen in love,
Mhm.
uh, and deeply, madly in love with that mountain. And I like literally promised myself that day that I am going to climb Everest,
Mhm.
whatever, even as much impossible as this sounds for someone like me,
Mhm.
a Gujarati software engineer, 110 kilos, unhealthy, zero genetic gift or disposition to do anything like this. But for me, I think I had found the dream or the calling of my life. And I use the word calling because, in the hindsight, I can sit and tell you many lessons. I can tell you many things why I climb. Like like generally I will tell people that I climb so that I can be a better version of myself, because mountains allow me to do that. Mountains allow me, they give me that platform where I can go and overcome a lot of my self doubt, overcome a lot of my limitations, overcome a lot of fears, and like no boundaries. Like I can go out and like go outside my comfort zone and do all these things. And I can say all of this in hindsight. But I have to tell you, it did not start that way. I did not want to become a better version of myself when I went to climb Everest. It is a calling. Like you wake up in the morning and all you can think of is just that one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing else in your life. No relationship with your parents, your wife,
Wow.
your work, nothing else matters.
Mm-hmm.
Only relationship, only single thing that matters is your calling.
Mm-hmm.
And this is very selfish thinking. But I think if you fall, i- if you have this, if you have a calling like this in your life, nothing will matter.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing, even if you have that realization that you are being selfish, even that will not matter. You will, everything will be overpowered.
Mm-hmm.
And you, and a lot of times people ask me also that, how did you show up? How did you train? If you have this level of calling, every morning you turn on the computer screen and you can see Everest instead
Mm-hmm.
of your code.
Yeah.
You're eating your food, but instead of the roti, you are seeing Everest.
Oh.
You're sleeping night and just relentlessly dreaming about Everest all
Mm-hmm.
the time. Like a lot of people think, how do you motivate yourself? I'm like, I don't need to motivate myself. I don't need to wake, like push myself out of the bed. I know, if I know I this is the calling of my life, and if I have to kind of achieve that calling, years what the like the pathway or the plan is going to look like, and then I have to show up and I have to execute the plan. So sure, I can say a lot of things in hindsight, but everything originated from this one single thing of calling to climb Everest,
Mm-hmm.
and just going on a journey to answer this calling.
Okay. So like when you come back to Mumbai, you might have to make some adjustments, like with your family, like in terms of how you train, how you eat. So what all did you do?
So yes, of course, I came back and I realized that, yeah, sure, yes, I have a calling. And again, any all of these things that I'm going to say probably are all in hindsight.
Mm-hmm.
I can now look back upon my journey and say, wow, I did this. That was just a lucky guess. Maybe it was fluke. Maybe I was not really thinking that way. But in hindsight, I can say things. So maybe this is how I did, or this is what I did right, and which is why I'm here. Uh, but I do think I came back home, and I think my instant reaction was, I am nowhere close to being ready to climb Everest. And if I, so I had grown in my career. I had become the director of India operations.
Okay.
We had gotten a 40 million C series round. This was back in 2009,
Nice.
and we were expanding rapidly across the world. We had rented a 15,000 square feet office in Mumbai, and I was responsible for the whole show. I was
Mhm.
hiring people. We had about hired 40 people,
Nice.
and we wanted to build a team of about 150 people. So I was kind of involved in all of that. And this is when the calling of Everest came, like bang, when I was on cusp of my career, of
Mm-hmm.
making that next big jump.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought this both can't be done together. And the way I am, I will be 100% in something or I'll be 0% in something. There's no middle ground for me in that sense. I can't be 50-50 here and there. That's just not going to work.
Okay.
So I called my boss and I said, I want to quit the job. And luckily, at that point, my boss talked me out of it, because his point was that you still have to pay bills.
Yeah.
And while this is great, you may have some savings, but those savings are not going to last long.
Mhm.
Believe me, you will run through money very fast,
Yeah.
and it's not smart thing to burn through your savings. You are still very valuable to us.
Mhm.
Why don't you you become a software engineer again?
Okay.
Uh, we will allow you as much time off you as you need. So let's say you come back and tell us that you need 6 months off in a year to just go train for Everest or to climb many more mountains.
Nice.
Great. Go climb mountains, 6 months, stay with us. You're
Oh, and
still,
would you be salary?
and salaried for those 6 months, not for the balance 6 months. But the
Yeah.
point was that you would still make enough money to be able to pay your yearly bills at least without burning through your savings.
Nice.
And you stay with us. You kind of are very very valuable to our company. And to me at that point it sounded a very reasonable thing to do. And I said, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Let's start working on finding my successor.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of just like got very quickly into a very different mode and started working on finding my successor and all of those things. So that was like the first change where I decided that my career is no longer important to me,
Okay.
that my calling is it. And that's what I said. It once you are at that level, career was so not even in my top 20 priority list. So it was that down in the list. It was just not there, non-existent. I didn't care.
Okay.
So luckily from there, from not care, I at least had something where I had a semblance of a career
Okay.
in the last 10 years. So that was decision one. And then decision two was just sitting down with the family and kind of saying that uh, I'm not going to make so much money. I'm going to probably make even less than one fourth of what I used to make.
Oh.
So we now suddenly need to work into that framework, and we need to now focus on our must haves. We need to chuck the nice to haves. We need to chuck all the middle ground things.
Mm-hmm.
Focus on must haves, and like just instead of having expensive vacations or like every weekend go eat out, see all shit ton of movies, do all this, spend wherever I wanted to, and do those kind of things. No, we are not doing any of that. And we are now just going to live within what I'm earning. So that was of course another kind of small change, or probably big change for the family. For
Yeah.
me it was my calling, so everything was easier. To live with lesser money, not a problem. But for family, it's completely different ball game suddenly.
Yeah.
So those kind of changes happen. And
I mean,
then
you had a wife. I mean, you had a dad to take care of. Like, must be quite tough.
as I said, if that calling is there, as I as insensitive I may sound or as selfish I may sound, that overpowers everything. You can't think through. There's no more rationality, has been flushed down the window. Logic has been, flushed down the toilet. Everything is gone. There's not non-existent in front of that calling that you have. Everything. So that's really, that can really, really be very bad for someone who can't handle this or cope up with this.
Yeah.
It can go completely south if someone kind of follows this kind of a calling. uh, but I think my family also understood how passionate I was about this calling, and that they also understood that this was a very risky endeavor and chances of me dying are much higher. And they
Yeah.
understood the kind of commitment I had to bring to the table so that I could just stay alive and do this successfully and come back.
Yeah.
So in that sense, there was a lot of there was a period where there was a lot of chaos in my life, a lot of friction in my life. But I think over a period of time, once the family understood that I am serious about this is not like 6 month thing and 1 year thing over which I'm kind of ruining my career.
Okay.
That is not what I was doing. That this was a much longer term thing that I'm getting into. They supported me. And to be very frank, without my family's support, climbing to the top of Everest, impossible. Without my wife's support, without my mother's support, impossible. If I was going out and climbing mountains 4 months, 6 months a year, then it was my wife who was becoming my father's primary caregiver and practically taking care of him like a newborn baby. Like, because my father literally required care like a newborn baby. So
Mhm.
that level of care, with that level of you know uh, dedication, I would not, maybe I'm missing the right word, but with it's not like, yeah, I'm doing it because, yeah, he's my husband's father.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I just need to do it. No, but in rather, I want to do it that level. Because when I was, initially when I was going out and climbing mountains, I was always worried about that, always like thinking what's going to happen. And then, like, how my wife supported throughout this entire journey, every time I went out in the mountains, I never had to think what about dad. I knew that in my wife's hands, he
Nice.
was like super safe.
Mhm.
In so I think that all of that support and all of that love and all of that, like, again, I would not call it sacrifice. I would call it, teamwork in some sense.
Mhm.
Um, like, look, she had just married. We had gotten married what in December of 2007, and ours was an arranged marriage.
Yeah.
So to if it was a love marriage, still you can think, but here she got married to me thinking, hey, this guy is a software engineer, he has a set job,
Mhm.
like, reliable source of income, everything is great. And then suddenly 2 years, he's like, he's going to climb Everest. He's
Yeah.
leaving his job. There's no reliable income anymore. There's no surety that he's even going to come back.
Mhm.
And all this, kind of flux and chaos and friction. But I think through this, we have come out much stronger in some sense. Uh, and yeah, as I said, without her support, without my mother's support, simply not possible. I would have climbed Everest.
Mhm. And like physically, what changes did you bring to your lifestyle?
Right. So, with of course, physical fitness is a must. Like, a lot of times, people will quote me out of context that mental fitness is 90% and physical fitness is 10%. But please understand, when I'm making that statement, I'm making that statement with the assumption that you are already physical fitness Superman.
Mhm.
And then mental fitness is going to come into picture. Don't assume that without physical fitness, you are going to be able to climb Everest using just mental fitness. Does not happen. I have not seen it happen. People who have tried doing that have either failed,
Mhm.
and people who have succeeded have lost their fingers, have lost their toes, have gotten lung infections, have gotten brain infections, and some of them have even died while coming down.
Mhm.
So, not a smart thing to do. So, of course, I quickly realized that I had to build superhuman levels of physical fitness. And so, my first focus was working and building a solid cardiovascular endurance,
Okay.
because climbing mountains is an endurance driven activity. And I knew that I had to work on my endurance, and that has to be my top priority
Mhm.
in some sense. And physical fitness is also kind of easier because there's a blueprint. Like,
Yeah.
for example, if you go to a gym today and you tell your trainer that, hey, I want to get jacked, I want to get,
Mhm.
build big muscles, then he's just going to say, okay, do this resistance training program, and you can, follow steps X, Y, Z, show up consistently, and, over many, many, many years, and you will be jacked.
Yeah.
Similarly with cardiovascular endurance, where you just have to have a reasonable program in place that you are going to follow over a period of week, and then just repeat over many, many months, years, probably decades,
Mhm.
and you will be fitter than before, faster than before, stronger than before, stronger than older you, fitter than older you, faster than older you. And uh, I am very good at consistency and discipline. These are things that probably just naturally come to me.
Mhm.
That once I have a reasonable plan in place, I can just go, I can just execute. I can execute relentlessly.
Mhm.
Not for years. Now it's been decades and I'm executing the same stuff over
Mhm.
and over again. I don't get bored. I don't need to change my exercises. I don't need to change anything. I can do the most boring, mundane, and routine stuff over and over and over again. And I truly believe, um, if anyone wants to succeed, I think this may be in any facet of life. I think majority of your success is going to come in routine, mundane,
True.
and the boring stuff, but just being able to do it very consistently over a long, long, long period of time.
Mhm.
And that's where, a lot of your success is going to come. So I think it was initially a journey of just physical fitness, and then on the side, just building skill, and
Mhm.
just kind of repeating, revising, learning, repeating, kind of just going through that process. And then eventually at some point, it just said, let's just go and climb mountains. Let's just go and climb many, many mountains. And I think doing a lot of these things repeatedly, I also realized that I was building a lot of mental stamina while doing all of this. It's like, imagine you are climbing in dark, imagine you are climbing in
Yeah.
snow, you are climbing on ice, rock, you are climbing without food, you are climbing without water.
Mhm.
Just understanding how you are going to get through that experience once. is just going to make you so much better the next time.
I mean, so climbing is in a sense an expensive pursuit as well. I mean, so were you using your savings in the meantime? Yeah.
Initial 4 years of training that I did, and of all the gear I purchased, of everything that I did on the related to mountain, was all from my savings.
Okay.
So yes, I was burning through a lot of savings. I had worked in the US for 4 or 5 years, so there was a lot of savings from there, and then for the 4 years in India also, and so a lot of savings from there. But I think in just as my CEO had said, I think in that first 4 years I burned through practically major bits of my savings.
Oh,
Luckily for my first attempt of climbing Everest, uh, the company or the people that I worked for a significant chunk of my career, I think
mhm.
almost 8 or 9 years of my career, uh, that guy was working for a Los Angeles based startup,
Okay.
and he reached out to me, and we were just, I had reached out to him as well that,
Mhm.
hey, if you can help me connect to any sponsors or anything.
Mhm.
He
Mhm.
said we would be interested in sponsoring some small part of your journey. I think he was the chief revenue officer, and then he was
Okay.
going to become the chief executive officer. I think at one point he just called me and said, we'll sponsor your entire expedition
Oh,
and we will also employ you.
oh,
So
nice.
I'm like, this is amazing, because he said that if you have to be in top shape to
Mhm.
go and do this climb, you also need to have some money in your bank so that you can pay your bills much easily.
True.
And instead of like, giving you the money, like, hey, here's the part of sponsorship, here's the money, you can use this for your home.
Mhm.
It would be much smarter to use your services to and actually employ you. And so they employed me,
Mhm.
and I worked for them and I made money, and that's how I was paying my bills during that time. And they sponsored my entire expedition. They sponsored all my gear.
Oh,
I think they totally wrote me a check for about $75,000 for the expedition, for the gear, and even for one training climb, just pre-training climb before Everest,
okay.
so that I'm like hyper ready for the
Mhm.
climb. And so it is amazing again, how things just fell in place out of the blue.
Nice. And then, I mean, you went to Everest like two times initially. You had to come back because of like avalanches and extreme weather and like earthquakes. So I mean, like, I mean, still the calling was strong enough to bring you back the third time.
So as I said, it at the end of the day, it was a calling. So yes, first time I went, 17 Sherpa guides died. My expedition was cancelled. Came home. I was not going to get sponsored again. They were a startup, and their entire year's marketing budget was spent on my
Yeah.
climb that didn't even last 20 days. So next time I crowdfunded, went back again. This time, a 7.9 magnitude earthquake hit Nepal. 21 people dead at base camp. 100 people injured at base camp. 10,000 people dead in Nepal. Uh, I miraculously survived a short death experience.
Yeah.
And so again, uh, but one thing I do realize that when I escaped that avalanche, the earthquake induced that day on April 25th, uh, 50 feet away from me was another campsite where 5 people ended up dying. And mere 50 feet was what separated me from my death. And if I was alive, to me, that felt like I got a second chance,
True.
and second chance at life itself. Not
Mhm.
many people get a second chance at life itself. Sure, second chances in business, second chance at school, all
Mhm.
of that, trivial in at least in my context. Second chance at life, huge. I mean, to me, I was super lucky that I was alive. And every moment from there on, for me, I have looked at it as a bonus,
Mhm.
because I had said my prayers when I saw that avalanche.
Yeah.
I was ready to die. I was ready to kind of, say goodbye to this world. So staying alive after that, for me, it when I came home, it just everyone was like, "Don't go back again. What if you die?" Or people were like, "You're not cut to do this." Or all this. I was not even listening to them what they were saying. None of that stuff even affected me, because when you get a second chance at life
Mm-hmm.
and you have this big dream, this big calling, to me, I'm like, in that avalanche, I didn't even know if I was going to be existing the next microsecond.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether I'm going to be alive tomorrow or not. All I'm now going to focus on is finishing this dream. That's it.
Okay.
And so to me, it was just like, I'm not going to give up on my dream.
Mm-hmm.
Heck, now, if anything, I'm going to be way more aggressive about my dream, about my calling. It is
Okay.
now time. So I thought of it completely differently than how people saw it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I didn't give up. I went back in 2016. Luckily, 2016 was a relatively uneventful
Mm-hmm.
year, and I say relatively because there's always events
Yeah.
happening throughout the climb. But given what had happened in the earlier 2 years, it was a relatively uneventful year. We all made it to the so many of us made it to the top.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I all I can say is that uh, May 19th, 2016 at like 9:20, I was standing on the top of the world, and that 6 year or maybe 7 year journey, in some sense, kind of came to a closure.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Yep.
all that's all I can say.
Awesome. All right, now let's just move to the last section of the podcast, which is the rapid fire round. I mean, so like anything that comes to the top of your mind, you can just say that. All right. So like, how do you unwind?
Spending time with family,
Mm-hmm.
my 2 year old daughter, and climbing mountains,
Mm-hmm.
or these days just uh, being in the gym and focusing on my health and focusing on my longevity.
I mean, a mountaineer you admire.
Ed Tours. He's an American mountaineer. He's climbed
It's based in
all the
Seattle.
four. He's based in Seattle. Yes, he's climbed all the 14 8,000 meter mountains without supplementary oxygen.
Yeah.
He's my idol. He has been my idol for a very long time. I've purchased his book, No Shortcuts to the Time,
Yes.
No Shortcuts to the Top, so many times. I've gifted it to so many people until now. I think if 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 you're going to ask me for one book recommendation, if that is even a question, I would say if you have to read one book on this planet, it has to be No Shortcuts to the Top. At least in my mind, I think that book changed my life.
I mean, I read Annapurna a few weeks back. It was amazing. I mean, by Ed Wisters, isn't it? Yeah.
You mean Annapurna?
I mean, sorry, I think
It's by Maurice
I
Herzog.
mean, not the Herzog book, but there's a book by Ed Westros on Annapurna as well.
On
Like,
Annapurna. Okay,
yeah.
okay. That one
I
you okay.
forgot the title. I mean, like climbing your own Annapurna, something like that.
Yes, yes, correct. That one.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it
Uh,
is his latest book.
yes. I mean, so just a follow-up question based on. I mean, so Ed had a partner in Veka. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on climbing with a partner and without a partner?
What are my? I have climbed significant amount of last 6 years with a partner, and my partner is my Sherpa guide, whose name is Mingma Tenzi Sherpa. And I think while I expressed my gratitude towards my wife and my mother, I think this is another guy, Mingma Tenzi Sherpa. I think when I am on the mountain, he is my family away from home. He's my friend. He's my guide. He's my mentor. Sometimes he even becomes my father. Sometimes he even becomes my mother. Sometimes he becomes my everything on that mountain. Without him, I would have never climbed to the top of Everest. I mean, insanely fit Sherpa guide. I have seen many Sherpa guides and many mountaineers in last 10, 11 years, but he is like
Mhm.
top notch, which is why he also put his name in the history as one of the first humans to climb to the top of K2 in winters earlier
Oh,
this January. It was a last mountaineering landmark remaining in the mountaineering history, and finally 10 Sherpa guides finished that climb earlier this year, and he was the lead guide who
mhm,
took the rope and put it on top of K2 in
mhm.
winters, which has never been done. 32 years people have been trying after trying, and finally like he put them on the top. So again, insanely amazing guy, and not because of his feats or because of his superhuman levels of fitness and endeavors, but just because he is super down to earth, super patient. I have never ever seen a human as patient as him. I'm like, even if I can get 10% of this guy's patience, I would have made it in this lifetime for sure. So uh, uh, I like climbing with partners, especially if you have a partner like Mingma, who you trust, who you can depend on when things go south, who just is very positive and brings all this to the table. Um, in some sense, my and Mingma's partnership is so much more from him,
Mhm.
less from my side, because he's the one who's always mentoring and guiding and kind of taking care of me. But he also inspires me to be the best version of myself, to show up really well trained and everything. But I also think, I mean, as I said, when things go wrong, I would rather have a partner than be climbing solo.
True.
So I personally don't like the style of climbing solo.
Mhm.
I don't. Uh, there could just be even the minutest thing, like
Yeah.
like a small piece of rock falling from 20 feet above. It'll pass by you as a missile.
Yeah.
Imagine if that kind of like it hits you and you are kind of not conscious for a while. If you had a partner, at least you will probably make it out of there alive
True.
and maybe able to climb again in life. But if you don't have a partner, if you're climbing solo, the room for error
Mhm.
is non-existent. I'm not saying that if you're climbing with a partner, you should keep room for error.
Yeah.
No, that's not how your mentality should be. But at least there is that safety net. With If you're climbing solo, no, I personally don't like climbing solo.
Makes sense. And like as Ed says again, like which is that climbing is a round trip. It's not a one-way thing. Yeah.
It is a round trip and not a suicide mission. That's how I call it.
Yep. Makes sense. Also, so now on next 8,000 meter that you would want to climb, and on 8,000 meter that you would never want to climb.
There's no 8,000 that I would never want to climb. Like nothing like that. If I get an opportunity, I would like to climb all the 14. Why not?
Mhm.
But in that, which I want to climb next, it has to be the one that the one that you see here. It is
Mhm.
called Makalu. It is the
Okay.
fifth highest mountain in the world, and this is a shot that we took from top of Mount Everest. So
Nice.
both me and Mingma were on top of Everest, and this is the view you get from top of Everest. So Makalu is something that it's just towering in front of you, this big, massive black pyramid. And I fell in love with Makalu that point itself. And
Nice.
I am going to climb Makalu someday. It's still a ways away.
Mhm.
I am on a slightly different journey,
Mhm.
but hopefully I'll be ready in a few years' time to go there.
Makes sense. Your advice to someone climbing their own Everest.
Um, I think once you have found your Everest, I think the first thing has to be to put a plan in place, show up
Mhm.
and execute, and put your head down, fall in love with the process. Don't depend on motivation. That would be like really really big advice. Motivation is not going to get you anywhere in life. Fall in love with the process. Don't fall in love with progress.
Mhm.
People get too attached to progress and they use that as a motivation or as a drive to move forward. It's not the most sustainable emotion or the most sustainable thing to kind of gauge things by. So fall in love with the process. Don't give up. Keep executing. Have patience, and yeah, hopefully you will make it to the top.
Mhm. And lastly, what do you think is the purpose of your life?
I think at the end of this day, I just want to be a little bit better than what I was at the start of this day.
Mhm.
That's all. I just want to be a better version of myself. And I think eventually I just want to be a better human being. For me, that is the purpose of my life. And just contribute back to the society and community as much as I can.
Nice. Awesome, Kuntal. Thank you so much for your time. It was great chatting with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And best of luck
Yep,
with
for sure.
your podcast and with all your endeavors.
Yep. Thank you. I hope that you enjoyed listening to this episode with Kuntal. Please don't forget to subscribe to Nails and Hammers on the platform of your choice and give it a 5-star rating.